there's been this one size fits all methodology. And I know even as a clinician, I kind of put everyone in a bucket. You've got high blood pressure, everyone can take these meds. And I learned over time that was not the case. And so fasting is very much the same way.
Welcome to the Woman's Doctor podcast, helping empower women to embrace their body and soul's full potential. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Cates, and after 22 years of working with patients, I found the answers to our health struggles are much deeper than most people realize. To help explore this, I'm interviewing colleagues and other wellness experts to get to the root cause so women can realize their true beauty and be informed decision makers for themselves and their loved ones. Fasting has been used therapeutically since at least the 5th century with Hippocrates, but fasting has changed over the years, and now intermittent fasting has become popular with both men and women. So I asked today's guest to come on the Woman's Doctor podcast to talk with us about it. Cynthia Thurlow is a nurse practitioner, CEO, and founder of Everyday Wellness Project. She is an international speaker with over 9.6 million views for her TEDX talk on intermittent fasting. Cynthia developed her intermittent fasting plan after her own health breakdown in her 40s. Intermittent fasting didn't just help her lose weight. She had more energy, fewer cravings, and lower blood glucose levels. And now, with 20 years of experience, she has worked with thousands of women in her private practice to make her unique program of intermittent fasting work for them too. And she has a new book, Intermittent Fasting Transformation. So join us today as we dive into all things intermittent fasting. Cynthia, welcome. It's so great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. I've been looking forward to connecting with you.
Yeah, so we're talking about intermittent fasting today. And I know there are definitely differences for men and women. And this is one of your big passions, right?
Absolutely. Because I think there's a lot of misnomers that women can fast the same way that men can. And I just like women to understand that we really need to lean into our physiology, because if we embrace the fluctuations that we have day to day, week to week, month to month, it allows us to really utilize this strategy in a way that will honor our hormones as opposed to dysregulate them. And I think on a lot of levels, after working with thousands of women, acknowledging that the way that we are looking at health and wellness really needs to shift, that, eating to stoke our metabolism, and I use air quotes, and to be eating snacks and mini meals is really contributing to a lot of hormonal imbalances. And so fasting is one of many ways that women can use a strategy that they could use throughout their lifetimes, irrespective of where they are. I think I probably am best known for speaking to the middle-aged women, perimenopause and menopause, but even cycling women can use this strategically, although much more carefully than the rest of us.
So I have a question. You have a TEDx talk that was really popular. Why do you think it was so many people wanted to watch that?
I think it was lightning in a bottle, to be honest with you. Obviously, it's a topic that I'm passionate about, but it just so happened that in 2019, the most searched Google function for nutrition was intermittent fasting. And so I think that was one of many ways that became quite popular. But I think it's also, I really broke it down in very simple terms. And so, I was speaking like I did to my patients. I would take complicated concepts as an NP and break them down so that my patients could understand them. And that's the value of a TEDx talk, is that you really get to share information in an accessible way. I would think a successful TEDx really breaks information down and shares it in a way that people can walk away and say, hey, okay, I can do this. I feel confident that I can integrate this into my lifestyle. I don't have to stress about it. I can just do it. I can take action.
Great. Perfect. Well, let's dive in a little bit more into intermittent fasting. First, tell everybody what exactly you mean by that.
It's as simple as saying eating less often. So meal frequency is definitely a hot topic right now. And I would be the first person to say, if we look back at ancestral health perspectives, if we look at what or how our ancestors ate way before refrigeration and the processed food industry and even pasteurization, food scarcity was a real thing. So people were not eating all day long. They didn't have the ability to do that. And so in many ways, just like I encourage people to get sunlight and to focus on sleep, intermittent fasting, eating less frequently, is a way to honor our bodies. It allows our body time to digest. It allows our body to better regulate key hormones like insulin and cortisol, as well as the sex hormones. It's also really a great way to lean into what true intrinsic hunger feels like, as opposed to, and I was guilty of this myself. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. It's time to eat breakfast. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It's time to eat lunch. And then, looking at dinner time, it's 7 o'clock at night. I should be eating. Well, now I can recognize, like, is my body actually hungry? Because I'm burning off stored fuel in between meals, and my body will let me know when it's ready to eat. I don't feel quite as compelled. And I think many women that embrace this concept, they feel like they, in many ways, have had a weight lifted off their shoulders because they're no longer focused on food. They can focus on their lives and things that are more important than, when's the next meal coming.
There is so much of that in our society of like life focused around food. What do you think really shifted this change? Because it wasn't that long ago when I was like right out of medical school. I know that was like over 20 years ago. It was big to just talk about eating every few hours.
Yes.
And that was like the thing. Everybody had to be, if you weren't eating every few hours, you were ruining your metabolism. What changed between then and now with all the work that people are doing around intermittent fasting?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, and I trained it probably at the same time you did. So I do recall hearing that rhetoric, and I probably discussed that quite a bit to my cardiology population. And I apologize now for that. I always say know better, do better. But I think in a lot of ways, people like Dr. Jason Fung, Dr. Ben Bickman, pioneers in this area, are really doing a lot of great research. And because they're researchers and physicians, they're encouraging, those of us that are not researchers to actually consider that concept, or the calories in, calories out model, is really outdated. It's missing something. We're really talking about hormonal regulation in the body. And, it even goes back farther into the 1950s, and looking at the 7-country study and looking at Ansel Keys and the interrelationship of demonizing fats to protect, quote unquote, sugar. And in a lot of ways, as a country, and as even at the legislative level, when we started encouraging our clinicians and our patients to be afraid of fat, when we take fat out of foods, if they're processed foods, we add a lot more sugar. And so what that sets us up with is that, fat is satiating, protein is satiating. And so what were people doing? They were eating more carbohydrates. It's interesting. I'm in the midst of preparing for a talk that I'm giving later this month. And this is one of the things I'm speaking on, is the rates of obesity really correlate with the influx of certain types of foods. And so obviously seed oils and the bastardization of fats, and all of a sudden people are eating more sugar, because when you take the fat out, that's what you need to add to make it palatable. And I'm sure you probably remember in the 1990s, Snackwell's cookies, which were horrible. It was like eating cardboard. They were non-fat cheese, non-fat, processed foods. And so in many ways, I think as we're looking at an increasingly unhealthy population, for many of us, it really has become a public health crisis. From my perspective, when you're looking at studies that 90% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, and that number is not getting better, we're seeing that extend into children and young adults. And so for me, I started looking at my patients and saying, why are my diabetics not getting better? Why is their heart disease getting worse? Why am I seeing more and more 30-year-olds that are on high dose statins, they're on diabetes medications? And I was always trying to take an angle like, how old is your child? Don't we, I want you to be healthy with your children. I don't want you to be, by the time you're 40, you're really struggling with more health issues. And so certainly for myself, it really stemmed from a desire to think outside the box. I trained at a big research institution on the East Coast. I'm very proud, a double alumni, and my parents taught me to really think beyond what I was conventionally trained in. And so that was at least the impetus. But I always give Jason Fung credit when I always say he gave me the courage to really leap outside the box and to say, maybe there's something here, like maybe fasting and eating less frequently is really the way to not only metabolic flexibility and metabolic health, but helping to forego a lot of the metabolic changes that I'm seeing in our population, and certainly not for the better. I speak from love. Like I always say, it always comes from a good place. It's a little bit of hard love, because there's no pill that's going to fix this. There really isn't. It's like you really have to lean into the lifestyle changes. And I can't wave a magic wand and make that all happen. But when people put in the dedicated work, they can see some pretty significant improvement in their well-being and longevity.
Thank you. Let's talk some more about those benefits. What are some of the things? Hormones are a big thing for women, of course. And you mentioned to me that hormonal balance can be achieved through or in part with intermittent fasting. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think I always like to start with, glucose and insulin, explaining that, when we eat in response to the foods we choose to eat. So obviously fat's going to have the most negligible impact on blood sugar, then protein, then carbohydrates. And obviously the more processed the carb, the more impact it will have negatively on your blood sugar response. And so our bodies, in response to the foods we eat, secrete a hormone called insulin, and it's not all bad. In fact, it's a great hormone when it's functioning properly. But what starts to happen is if you are constantly eating and your blood sugar's up and your insulin's being secreted to bring it down, if insulin's not low at some point during the day or lower, your body's not going to have an ability to tap into fat stores for energy. And we want our bodies to be able to use carbohydrates as a fuel source and fats. That's metabolic flexibility. Most Americans are stuck in this carbohydrate burning model. And that's where we start to see, the weight loss resistance, the feeling hangry, the lack of energy, et cetera. Whereas if you're using fat as a fuel source, and I'm oversimplifying just to make it really clear, if you're using fats as a fuel source, it's a much more efficient source of fuel. And we have even if you're thin, you have endless amounts of fat to store it, to grab for fuel. And so when you are in a fasted state, your insulin levels are lower, and it allows your body over time to become fat adapted. And what that means is your body will go in while you are in an unfed state. It'll pull some fat out of your fat stores, breaks them down into ketones. One in particular is called beta hydroxybutyrate. It diffuses across the blood-brain barrier and allows for this tremendous mental clarity. So that's like one of the big benefits up front. Mental clarity and energy. And those are the things I think a lot of people are very surprised by. They're like, wow, I can get a lot done in the morning when I'm in a fasted state. In fact, when I do most of my public talks, I am completely fasted state because I get so kind of excited about having the ability to not have to worry about digesting food. So that's a big one. Those are two big ones. Next, I think about autophagy, this waste and recycling process. So when we're in an unfed state, our body can go in and get rid of things that we don't need. So it's almost like taking out the garbage, disease organelles, mitochondria, et cetera. And this is important because disease disordered cells can go on to make us prone to developing neurodegenerative disorders. It can make us prone to certain types of cancers. And so this is a very, very important thing. But when we're really talking about hormones, insulin, cortisol, and glucose are very, very important. I think it's important for people to understand that, when we're looking at weight loss resistance, and for a lot of women, this is an enormous pain point. It's really speaking to this blood sugar insulin issue primarily, and then understanding that if we are insulin resistant, so if our cells are no longer as responsive to moving blood sugar in from the bloodstream into the cell, this is insulin resistant. It's like you're knocking on a door and no one can hear you. Then you are going to be prone to having sex hormone imbalances. And again, an oversimplification, but this can manifest as estrogen dominance, which can be, very common for women to experience in perimenopause, the 5 to 10 years preceding menopause. When progesterone is low in the body, you may have trouble sleeping. You may be more anxious and depressed. This is when a lot of women are placed on antidepressants, anti-anxiety agents at this stage. When I think about estrogen dominance, weight loss resistance, breast tenderness, very heavy menstrual cycles, and you can also get imbalances in testosterone. So it's important for people to understand that if we're weight loss resistant, oftentimes the adipose tissue, the fat tissue, is actually a very sophisticated organ. I think a lot of people think it's fat. It's not a big deal. There's a lot of inflammatory properties, inflammatory cytokines, other things that, will dysregulate communication in the body. There are key hunger and satiety hormones, leptin and ghrelin are two examples. And what they will do is when your body is in an overfed state chronically, habitually, and if you have a lot of adipose tissue in your body, you're going to become leptin resistant. So your brain doesn't realize that your stomach is full. And that further exacerbates this insulin resistance. So all of these hormones are all interconnected. It's not as if you're off on an island. You don't have to worry about it. It's very common for women as well to see issues surrounding thyroid health. In fact, 90 to 95% of women that have an underactive thyroid, it's related to an autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's. And so when you have a thyroid receptor on every cell in the body, If you are dealing with chronically overeating, or you're dealing with weight loss resistance, you're insulin resistant, it's not at all uncommon that the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cells, they don't work. It's almost like a spark plug. They just don't work as efficiently. And this is another reason why it's so important to really lean into eating less frequently. And then lastly, I would say the other thing, we hear this word inflammation, and I always say inflammation is not all bad, but if you're eating a highly processed, hyper palatable diet, you're not eating the right types of fat, you're not eating enough protein, and you're eating too frequently, you will stoke the metabolism in the wrong way. You're going to stoke this chronic inflammation, oxidative stress. Again, this damages the powerhouses of our cells, the mitochondria, and that can further exacerbate things. So there's a lot to unpack there, but the big takeaway is that when we eat less often, we are able to better balance a lot of these key hormones that I talked about. And I remind women all the time that if it took you 10 years, 15 years to become insulin resistant, diabetic, leptin resistant, it doesn't change overnight. However, you can over time help to reverse those changes, but it's not going to be instantaneous. And that's something that I think is really important, just to kind of set those expectations that you didn't get into that trouble overnight. It doesn't get fixed overnight, but as you're heading in the right direction, day to day, week to week, month to month, you can make some incredible strides in your health.
Yeah, amazing. And it seems that it's important to have a healthy foundation with your diet before you just go into fasting, right? Because if you're not eating the right foods and then you fast, that's when I think people start to feel so bad. Like, oh, I can't go without eating because I feel so bad. What are you eating before that point? So let's talk about more of the timing when you say eating less, like how long do you recommend people fast between meals, and what are they eating when they do eat?
Yeah, it's a great question and an important one. So first you have to stop snacking. So this is kind of my methodology. You have to stop snacking because that will then force you to readjust your macros, your protein, fat, and carbohydrates with your meals. And this is like ripping off a Band-Aid, because what do people do? They don't think anything of having like a candy bar in the afternoon or something after dinner or something in between. Maybe they're having a really fatty coffee in between breakfast and lunch. And so you have to stop snacking first, and then really focusing your meals on protein, nutrient density. We know protein is the most satiating macronutrient. And for a variety of reasons, protein is critically important for women to be consuming. So more protein. So if I oftentimes will suggest track your macros to get a sense of what that size protein allocation looks like. In fact, I did this in IG stories yesterday because I get asked so frequently. And I said, now I know what 8 ounces of steak looks like, but in the beginning I didn't. So, making sure you're hitting your protein macros with your meals, non-starchy vegetables. This is really important. I am a fan of vegetables. I like brightly pigmented vegetables. Save the non-starchies. Those should not be the focus of your diet. And the healthy fats piece, very important. But like if you're having a ribeye, you don't need more fats added to that meal. But if you're having filet, or you're having like a lower fat fish like cod versus salmon, then you can add some healthy fats. Maybe you're having a little bit of avocado. Maybe you're having some salted macadamia nuts on top of a salad with some protein. So that's number 2. Number 1, stop snacking. Number 2 is readjust your macros. And then number 3, and that could take some people a few weeks. If you're really carbohydrate dependent, I do speak a lot about, I'm not anti-carb, but I think the vast majority of people that need to lose weight actually need to restrict their carbohydrates. And the average American consumes anywhere from 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day. So I usually would say start with reducing your carbohydrate intake and certainly getting rid of the processed carbs. And like I said, this may take a few weeks. And then the next step is you go from dinner to breakfast without eating. Now, you spend most of that time sleeping. So people are like, oh my God, there's no way I can do that. And I always say, listen, if you go 14 hours fasted, you probably spent 8 hours of it sleeping. So it's really only the time after dinner till you go to bed. And then from the time you wake up until you choose to break your fast. And for a lot of people, that's life-changing because we're a nation of snackers. We snack all the time. People eat ice cream at night and they have alcohol and all the things that people consume. And there's no judgment. We've been telling our patients the wrong things for a long time. But once you start eliminating snacking, readjusting your macros, then you can start with like 13 or 14 hours fast. And depending how you're feeling, then you can slowly start moving that window of time out. Now, it's important to note, like I'm a proponent of clean fasting, which means while you're in a fasted state, you can absolutely keep yourself hydrated. You can consume electrolytes, bitter tea or bitter coffee. This is important. A lot of people are like, I'm used to having my creamer and my stevia and all these other things. I just remind them, dairy, i.e. cream, is insulinemic. It will break a fast. It will actually evoke an insulin response. So we want to avoid those things. So you can add, like, if you find that plain coffee is really bitter, and for people that have been adding a lot of creamers and sugars for a long time, I can understand because your palate is not adjusted to the bitterness. But you can add things like cinnamon. You can add, high quality salt like Redmond sea salt, and that will change the flavor profile enough that for many people makes it more palatable. And there's a reason why you want bitter coffees and bitter teas. The polyphenols, the plant-based compounds in them, will help boost fat oxidation, will help you burn more fat. So this is an important, like lipolysis is a really important thing to think about. And then, when you break your fast, and this is very individual, I encourage people to experiment. For me, I like to sit down and have a meal. Like yesterday, my first meal was, I think I had steak and asparagus, and that works for me. Some people need to break their fast a little more gently. They want to have some bone broth. Maybe they're going to have a light salad and then they'll eat like a bigger meal an hour later. It's completely fine. But I find, one thing that's important for people to understand: when you break your fast, you're always breaking it with some protein, either protein and fats or protein and carbs. We do not break our fast with carbs and fat together, because what happens? You don't have the protein to buffer that satiety. And protein and carbs rarely occur together in nature. So there was someone the other day, I'll give you an example. They're like, I love my avocado toast. I don't want to stop eating my avocado toast. And I said, well, that's great. But maybe with your avocado toast, maybe what you need to have is an egg, or maybe you need to have some bacon, or maybe you have some sausage, but you want to make sure that you are buffering what you're eating, either protein and fat, protein and carbs. And then if you do that, then that'll help mitigate your blood sugar response. You're not going to be, searching for more food after your meal. You should go, 3, 4, 5 more hours until you eat again.
Awesome. Okay. So timing, like, can you give an example of a day? Like, and I know it's different, a little bit different for everyone, but can you give an example of your day when you get up? Do you have coffee? When do you have your first meal? When's the next one?
Great question. Well, I'm usually up early. This week, my kids are on spring break, so I'm not getting up as early, but I'm usually up at 6. I like to get my workout in. So I drink water with electrolytes, unflavored electrolytes. I usually then get in the shower, and I'll usually have some green tea. I'm not a coffee drinker. It kind of probably makes me strange to hear that. My husband isn't either. That's the irony. When we met each other, we're probably the only two non-coffee drinkers in the world. And then I'll just kind of start my business day. And then usually around 10 or 11, depending on my day, that's when I'll eat my first meal. Like I said, yesterday, as an example, I had steak and asparagus. And then a couple hours later, I had another meal. I think I had salad with eggs. I've recently had some issues with histamine and hives. And so we've been very careful about, eating foods that I know my body is accepting of. So salad and eggs. For me, I'm all about switching up proteins. I could have bison, I could have fish. I am a huge proponent. I don't eat a lot of chicken, although I do like chicken. I just don't eat a lot of it. Depending on the day, some days I'll have 2 meals in that window, from 10 to 6. I usually try to finish my feeding window before 6 o'clock. 10 to 6 or like 11 to 5, depending on the day. I try to have 2 larger meals. Yesterday, just by pure happenstance, I had 3 because I did a leg day workout. And on days I lift heavy, I will sometimes add in, a high quality protein shake. I'm dairy free, but I have a high quality protein shake, and I had a side of berries. That was my, I cycle my carbohydrates. This is what works for me. And then typically I just drink water until bedtime. So from, 5 or 6 o'clock, water until bedtime. And then I'm usually asleep by 9:30 or 10. That's actually what works best for me. And I'm a solid 8-hour night sleeper. I tell everyone I'm not one of those people that can get by with, 20, getting by with 4 to 5 hours of sleep. I don't understand those people. I couldn't function that way, but I can respect it.
Yeah. All right. Well, it probably took a little time to get to the point where you are now.
Absolutely. And that's the important thing. That's why when I was stressing, you might go from dinner to breakfast, and then you're slowly moving your window out. Now I can do 2-day fast. I can do a full day fast. My sweet spot is probably 16 to 18 hours fasted, but I really lean into how my body feels. Like some days when I lift really heavy in the gym and I'm really hungry and I've got, interviews, or I've got, media work or stuff within my business, and I'm going to be busy all day, I have to decide, do I want to break my fast before I start my day, or do I want to go a little longer? And it just depends on how I'm feeling. And that's one of the things I teach in the book, is really encouraging women to lean into, where are they in their menstrual cycle? How do they feel? And then just really playing upon that, because unfortunately, for a long time, there's been this one size fits all methodology. And I know even as a clinician, I kind of put everyone in a bucket. You've got high blood pressure, everyone can take these meds. And I learned over time that was not the case. And so fasting is very much the same way. I think it's important to note that women who are in menopause, so 12 months without a menstrual cycle, and men usually have an easier time with fasting because they're not dealing with as much hormonal flux week to week, day to day, like menstruating women or women that are still getting a menstrual cycle every month. And that's an important kind of caveat that, when I was still, getting a cycle every month, I would lean into, where in my cycle I could fast longer, I could do more challenging workouts versus, right before my menstrual cycle, when I was like, okay, I need to like take my foot off the gas and just, honor where my body is and not overtax it. And that's an important distinction because I think the majority of women that I interact with on social media, they want to fast the same way every day of the month. And I'm like, no, our body actually really needs variety.
Oh, that's a really great point. And I'm so glad you brought that up because a lot of the early work on this was done with men, right? And male researchers. And we're not just many men, right? We have a lot of differences in our hormones and our physiology and our anatomy. So it's important to treat us differently.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when I'm like doing prep for a talk that I'm doing later this month. And it was astounding to find that I think it was from 1997 until, like 1993, there was no phase 1 clinical research done on women because our physiology is considered to be a hindrance. So a lot of the things that you hear on social media about fasting is research extrapolated from rodents. Yes, they're mammals, but we have a completely different gestational cycle. I mean, we're not the same, or it's done on men, or it's done on obese menopausal women. And I always say that doesn't represent all of us. And so my hope is that over time, there'll be more high quality research done on women that are of childbearing age and even in perimenopause and menopause so that, we can make, better clinical outcomes and be able to help guide and navigate women through these different periods in their lives.
Well, very exciting. It's exciting to see. It'll be great to see the research unfold, hopefully more. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with us about intermittent fasting. Can you tell everyone where they can learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the easiest place to start is my website, which is my name, www.cynthiathurlow.com. You get access to the books, which is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and your local booksellers. I have a great podcast called Everyday Wellness, where I get to interview some pretty amazing individuals in the health and wellness space. You will find me on Instagram, Twitter, where I'm a little bit snarky, be forewarned, depends on the day. And then I have a free Facebook group called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name. And you're welcome to join that. It's a very supportive group of great humans. Men and women are part of that group, but it's really a great place to start.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you, Cynthia, for coming on. Really appreciate the interview today.
Yeah. Thanks for connecting.
Thank you for listening to the Woman's Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with the women in your life. And to learn all about balancing hormones, join us for the Hormones, Health, and Harmony docuseries at thewomansdoctor.com.